Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final in our series of Amplifying Voices webinar from Northern Power Women. My name's Simone and I'm the founder of Northern Power Women and Northern Power Futures. And I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Ranjana Bell MBE, who is going to take us through on a mystery tour of her considerable experience. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with her this afternoon. In the bottom of the console, you will see there is Q&A and there's chat. Please say hello. And if you've got any questions, please pop them into the Q&A section. And as we go through the chat today, I'll come to you to ask your question, if that's okay. But without further ado, we're going to spend the next hour talking through the life and times and accomplishments of Ranjana. But I'm going to let you start the journey because it's unbelievable. I've got a whole page of accomplishments and achievements, but I'm going to let you take us on your journey to start with. But you are so very welcome into the Northern Power Women world today.
Well, thank you, Simone, and I'm deeply honoured to be here. But I want to say hello to everybody else that I can't see at the minute. Welcome into my home. And if you were all here, I'd make you my famous chips and give you a cup of tea. But I'm sorry, we're not actually facing each other now. But I thought I'd start by just giving everybody a bit of an insight into how I come to be the person I am and why I do what I do. And I mean, when I reflect on this, which I have been a lot recently, is that I was 4.5 years old when I left India with my mum and my brother. My dad had come over to England, as people did in the 1950s, to improve the quality of life for my brother and myself and my dad and my mum. And my dad told my mum to leave Deepak and me behind in India, but my mum wouldn't do that. So he wasn't expecting us to land at Tilbury Docks after 3 weeks on a ship. And we arrived, and of course, what my dad and my mum were faced with was they couldn't find any accommodation for, well, you couldn't get accommodation because it was no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, and no children. So we had to be sneaked in to my dad's room. But then, this is something I still find quite amazing. Well, it's a difficult thing, but during that period of time, there were lots of people in big houses in places in Essex. The place we went to was Billericay, where they were unregulated foster carers. And all the families that couldn't get their children into their accommodation were sent to live in these houses with strangers. So no sooner had Deepak and I arrived in England, we had to be sent off to these dormitories in these big houses, and we were separated. And I didn't speak any English. My brother was the person who would have spoken for me, but he was in the boys' dormitory, I was in the girls' dormitory. And I guess part of me has blocked all that out because I don't remember it in any detail, even though I turned 5 when I was there and started speaking English and forgot all my Punjabi then. And I just think the damage that must have done to a 4.5-year-old is just, I can't even imagine it myself. But then when I went to live with mum and dad, and I witnessed as a child the kind of treatment that particularly my mum got on a regular basis, being kicked out of shops, kicked off buses. We were told to go back where we came from, or my brother and I were treated as sort of exotic children where our skin was stroked, and we were talked about as if we weren't there. You know, aren't they interesting? Aren't they this? Aren't they that? You know, it was a very, very strange world. But I think what I saw and what I felt for my mum set me on the journey to, I just can't abide in injustice. You know, I ended up fighting with mum because I would say to her, well, I'm not putting up with that. You're not going to put up with that. And she would always say, turn the other cheek. Well, I never listened to that. I never have, and I never will. And that's the journey I've been on. Is I'm doing it because I couldn't bear to think that people are going to live through the things that my family did in the UK in the 50s, 60s and onwards. You know, there have been successes, don't get me wrong. It hasn't all been a terrible journey, but there have been some obvious explanations to me as to why I do what I do and still believe in it so passionately that I just can't, I won't see injustice and let it go.
And
That's me.
It's especially you. How old is your brother?
He was 2 years older than me. I mean, all my family have passed away now, so there's just me left. And my dad didn't live. If he'd lived a few months longer, he would have been so delighted that all the sacrifices he made, and I got an MBE. And it broke my heart that he had died by the time I got it. I would have taken him to the palace. He would have loved meeting the royals. That would have made him feel it was all worth it. But sadly, he died just before I got it. So I do it posthumously for him.
Wow. I mean, and how does this, you know, from the age of 4, 3 weeks at sea, and then put into the dorm and just, but do you think it was it about the fight? You talk about the injustice and just how you were treated, but how did you stay motivated all that time? You know, you've had a fight with your parents. I know there were successes along the way, but how did you keep motivated to keep?
Well, as a child, I think what my brother and I did, we went into mega denial about being Asian. We wouldn't eat curries. We wouldn't identify with our own culture. When we went to school, we wanted to tell the other kids we'd had sausages and beans and all the things that they did in order to fit in. So there was a huge period of denial in our own lives about who we were. But I think as I got older and I started to actually see some of the injustice, because I think the real turning point for me didn't come till I was 33, when I actually, and I'm talking specifically about what happens to Black people, was when I got a job as a race equality officer. But before that, I had started working as a teacher in special education. So I got an insight into injustice on children with special needs and the way that families and children were treated then, particularly with autism at that time, which was only just being given some recognition. But the journey took me to race equality. And I have to say that I could have lived most of my life never realizing what it was like for people living in the West End of Newcastle, for example, the Bangladeshi community in particular in the 80s, because my world hadn't been like theirs. So it would have been easy to go into denial and say, I don't know what they're suffering, you know, it's not for me. But I felt as if I'd woken up into something that I didn't like, but I wasn't going to let continue. And that really platformed it right off to doing what I do.
Because you then went back in education again, didn't you? Quality officer in a university, and then down a non-exec role. Is that so? It's always been.
Well, I worked for Newcastle City Council doing the race stuff for many years, and then into it was Newcastle Polytechnic then, which I always wished it had stayed at Polytechnic, but we went into being a university whilst I was there. That was a very difficult journey for me, because what I've realised is that certainly then, in my experience, the world of higher education seems to have laws of its own. It doesn't exist in our world. And instead of seeing me as the person that could help them to get things right, they saw me very much as the enemy. And I did not have a pleasant journey there. And I had to find my ways to support the injustice with staff and students. So that's what I ended up doing, where really I should have been working strategically to get the university to, they should have been saying, we don't want that to be the experience of our customers, our students, we want it to be right. How can we do that? But that wasn't my journey and my experience. And I'd like to believe that it's very different now. I don't know, because I'm not back in that sector, but as a result of my experience, what it did do positively for me, I got a lot of experience in training, a lot of experience in understanding anti-discrimination from an employment perspective. So I set up my own business, RBA, and although now I'm a sole trader, it was a limited company for some considerable time. And I worked right across the sectors, working with people who actually wanted to hear what I had to say because they were paying me. So they felt some obligation to hear what I was going to say. So it wasn't a tick box for them. They had genuinely wanted to look at what they were doing and how to put things right.
And I think that is the thing. A lot of organisations do just look at it, or just do take a tick box approach. We'll get somebody in, do that audit, crack on, there we go. We've solved diversity, we've solved race equality, the end. It's not, you know, how do we get away from that tick box mentality?
Well, I mean, I know we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, but really where I think we're at now is the lid's off. All the tick boxing, the doing it because you have to rather than because it's the right thing to do, the lid's off. Because, you know, in terms of what Black Lives Matter, the movement, if you can call it a movement, I think we're trying to simplify Black Lives Matter when it's a very complex thing, because we're not the USA. We don't define black in the same way as them. And there's a big debate going on about, you know, what black means here in this context for us. But what I think it's done is it's taken the lid. For a lot of people personally, all the pain that we've been through on our journeys, we put in boxes and put lids on them because we have to find a way to be happy and to get through it. Now the lids have been taken off. And if you read anything on blogs and LinkedIn, people are sharing their experiences. And what hurt me more than anything else is I've spent 40 years doing a whole range of things around race, and young people are suffering the same things that I did. And it just breaks my heart to think that we're back to, I mean, the good thing about Black Lives Matter is that there's nowhere to hide now. So it's being put out there and saying, you know, structural racism, individual racism, it's being questioned in every sector, in every business. And at the moment, we seem to be getting quite a positive response of people saying, yes, 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 we need to do this. But there's nothing new in it, Simone. It's just regurgitating what we said in the 80s, actually, or even the 70s, about the things that we need to do. And I'm hoping that some of our pain can be healed again, because I don't like feeling anxious and scared and thinking, you know, is it going to be my grandson who somebody, a police officer, decides to treat in a particular way and damages him? You know, I don't want those fears to be around for any of us. And every day we're reading one more horrible story about a family that's suffering because of what's happened somewhere. We've got another scenario of black on black stabbings amongst young people. And what I think we lost, Simone, was in the 80s, we used to do awareness training. That's what it was called. And people didn't like it because people felt under attack. You know, that we were saying to people, well, when you do that, this is the impact of that. Oh, don't call me a racist, don't call me a homophobic, you know, don't do that. And what developed was that sort of training was dropped, because that was focused on changing hearts and minds. Because people will do the right thing if they understand why. And my belief is we have to have the opportunity to have those difficult discussions in a safe environment. We don't have them anymore. The training is very much about right and wrong answers. So it's focused on the law, or is this the discrimination, or so you can have a tick list. So you don't have to be an expert in equality and diversity or inclusion, but you're doing a tick list of yes, that's right. And for me, what we've lost is the opportunity for us to sit together in a safe place without judgment, for people to say, well, I don't understand that. I don't know why. I mean, what, for example, why do we need women on boards when they work perfectly well with men on them? What do, you know, what's that all about? It should be, you always get that, it should be about skills. And we say, yes, it is about skills. It's just, you're not engaging with them, that's all. But it's about giving people the space to say what they are fearful of now, because they might be accused of being something.
It's about being intentional. I think that's the word that has resonated with me over the past sort of 7 or 8 weeks, is about being intentional. If you're going to do something, don't, you know, it's absolutely, like you say, the genie's out the bottle now, you know, and I'm really conscious about how we can ensure this has a long-term influence, not just oh, we're responding to George Floyd, we're doing it in the COVID era, but then all of a sudden people are back in the new norm, and they kind of forget what they promised or whatever to do. So I'm really passionate about how we can ensure this has a long-term influence and a long-term positive impact. And I wonder, you're talking about, it's actually about it's being the law, it's wrong or right, you know, it's about having, and I know many people will be listening to this going, well, actually, I have asked a few questions, but is there anything I can practice? What can I do?
What can you do? I mean, I used to think I could change the world in my youth. In my 30s, I thought, if they only listened to me, we'd all be in a better place. Sometimes I still think that, because we're still having those same conversations. But I think the starting point's got to be, is to be honest with ourselves and actually acknowledge that I've got to look at me and why I think the things I think and do the things I do. And if, you know, starting with, we're all full of biases and prejudices, and we've been influenced by the media primarily, but by family, by friends, by wanting to fit in wherever we are. And sometimes people are quite chameleon-like, they'll change in different environments. Remember that feeling when you're sitting with your close friends and suddenly they say something and you go, where did that come from? You know, you just don't know. People say things sometimes just to fit in. But I think if we acknowledge that we have those prejudices, those biases, some positive, some negative, and then start to question why am I believing that? Why am I thinking that? Because we need to take responsibility for ourselves, because quite a lot of the people you probably engage with hold some position of authority and power. So those prejudices can influence, well, will influence how they make decisions and what they do. And to me, it's a very brave senior leader that stands up and says, actually, I've been getting it wrong all these years and thinking X. And now I've heard why. I need to think very carefully about how my business is run, or how we run our police service or fire service or local authority. But it's about actively acknowledging yourself, but actively listening, because part of Black Lives Matter is we've all been saying it for a very long time. We're not saying anything new, and we just need to be heard in what we're saying.
You talked, you know, this has been 40 years of your life, you know, many challenges. Are there any sort of successes, the big successes that you've had along the way that you think, could we not do that again, because that worked. And it's probably what you're just saying, listening, having the awkward conversations.
I think the thing is, where I think I've had the most influence was in my local authority days as race equality officer. I decided to focus on what we called them black women then, black being a collective inclusive term rather than African American term, anyone that's not white. So I focused my work on the people that I thought were the most invisible, and decisions were being made on their behalf when they had no access to the actual decision making, and that was black women. So I spent an awful lot of time in the 80s with other women like myself, talking through how do we get jobs, how do we get to influence decisions, how are we actually going to elevate ourselves into a position where we can be heard. So with the little bit of privilege I had working in the civic centre, I used to bring in like 15, 20 primarily Asian women at that time through the corridors of the civic centre into meeting rooms, into those big boardrooms, to discuss agendas that were being discussed by councillors. Like there was a local government and racial equality subcommittee, and there was a women's issues subcommittee. So I used to get the papers and we used to analyse them in detail, and then we practiced which bits we were going to challenge in the meetings, and they would be skilled up to actually ask the questions. Now the legacy of that is that their children, like mine, I've got grandchildren now, have no longer been channeled into race equality work or equal opportunities work like we were. They're all successful business people and lawyers, and they're doing amazing things around the world. They didn't feel like, as we did, the only jobs that we could get were working in inequality. And I'm so pleased with that, because I meet all these young women now, and they are so successful and amazing young women. So I'm happy with my legacy with that effort at the beginning.
And can I just ask you, we talked just prior to the call today about role models. That's a massive passion of Northern Power women. But clearly your family were role models to you, but who else out there at the time, as you were sort of navigating your career, who were the people you look to?
Well, I think probably it's not a black woman, although there are plenty of influences for me for different reasons at different times. I think I've always wished I could be like Nelson Mandela, where he could cope with enormous pain and come out of it the most gentle, caring person, with Desmond Tutu and peace and reconciliation. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd like to have his personality and his ability to do what he did. And I'd like to be like Desmond Tutu and call truth and reconciliation commissions to get rid of this pain that we're in, to bring people together, to say, this is how you made me feel, and can we move on from this, and do you understand? I wish we could do more of that, because at the moment with Black Lives Matter, we're locked in conflict like this. You know, you've got the right-wing protesters interpreting everything in a really bad, dangerous way. The guy from Sunderland just been found guilty of kicking a police officer at one of the Black Lives Matter marches just today, you know, where they think they're protecting the British Empire. And you've got Black Lives Matters doing a peaceful demonstrations with the knee. And it's just at opposite ends. And we need to find a way to bring that, whether we can ever do it with the right-wing extremists, I don't know, but we need some peace and to move forward.
And I'm gonna throw up Jackie has popped a question into the chat. Jackie, I've brought you forward. Can you hear us, Jackie? If not, I will read Jackie's question out. If you spend the whole time going, unmute, unmute. Jackie, you were there? I'll read Jackie's question out. Oh, Jackie, you're there, I think. Jackie says, this has been so illuminating. I work in a university and do a lot of work with widening participation programs. I'm considering starting a reverse mentoring program. Have you had any experience of this, and is reverse mentoring successful in affecting change?
Well, I personally, I have no qualifications as a mentor, and I wouldn't sell my skill as a mentor, but what people tell me is that the way I am and the way I engage with them is that it lifts them to a position where building their confidence is key to believing in themselves. So mentoring for me with the right person is phenomenally good, brilliant thing to do. And I think, you know, as we come out of COVID and as we come out of the Black Lives Matter again, where people are feeling very, very delicate and sensitive right now, good role models and good mentors are going to be key to giving them the confidence that they need to harness and focus their positive aspects and not just get locked into the pain and the negativity. I don't know if that helps.
Thanks, Jackie. I don't know if you're with us.
Yeah, hello, sorry, I've got a terrible connection here and it keeps dropping. Thank you. I caught some of that about mentoring. I was thinking less about mentoring in the way that many of us think about it, and more about reverse mentoring, where you actually get people from, let's say, you know, disadvantaged, less privileged, or whatever background, talking to people in power about exactly what you said, Ranjana, about how it feels to be in that position. Because I think we tend to use mentoring as a sort of, not a power dynamic, but it tends to be, you know, the person with experience mentoring the younger person. And what I'm really interested in, because I've come across it recently in various forms, is how we can sort of turn that 180 degrees and start to engage some of the conversations that you've been saying with the people who are in positions of power and influence, and whether or not you've had experience of that and what you think about it as an idea.
I do, and I think the starting point is to not make it too complex, but to get leaders to actually be willing to listen. I think it's something that Simone and I were talking about a bit earlier. It's about listening, and you know, one of the things that I think each of us can do is, if we're still working, I'm retired now, but when you're working, is to say to your bosses, what are you actually going to do about this, rather than just saying we're terrible, we support Black Lives Matter and no more. That isn't enough. It's about actually saying, well, we need to look internally and look at ourselves. So if a senior management team was to actually sit in a room with some key people that you know can share their experiences. Where I've seen it work brilliantly is with the police. In the 80s and 90s, I was involved with police training, and it was very much the in thing then to bring, it wasn't exactly the best thing, but it worked, to bring victims in to share their experiences of the police with the police officers. Whilst I felt, it must be so painful for them to sit there and do that, because that's what we're asking people to do, is to share their painful experiences with a group of people they don't know. So it's really got to be set up really, really well. And that worked, because I think they shuffled in their seats, and they were, I did see in one police service that I went to, where the officers did the classic, yeah, but, you know, maybe they'd done something wrong and they were told, you're not here to comment, you're here to listen. Where I've seen it work well with young people is you bring the young people in a group together and they discuss amongst themselves how they want to present their issues as a group to this group of people, and they come in and they do a presentation on it. So they're doing it collectively rather than as individuals, and that worked really well. So there's various models that you can use, but I think you just got to set it up really well, remembering that we're asking people to share painful experiences with groups of unknown people.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a real trust issue there, isn't there?
Yeah.
On both sides, but that's really helpful. And for what it's worth, I think, you know, you likened yourself to, or wanted to be seen as like Mandela. Well, absolutely. You know, as far as I'm concerned, you're doing that. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very kind.
Hi.
Hello.
Simone, you're muted.
Simone's muted. That's right.
Shall I ask my question? You're still muted.
She's back.
Sorry, it's one of them moments, isn't it? One of them moments. Irene, I was saying the wonderful Irene has come to join us and ask a question, but you couldn't lip read.
No, I couldn't lip read. Hi, do you know, Ranjana, that was amazing. I really, really enjoyed what you were saying there. And lots of your experiences I could really resonate with, particularly when you started talking about the denial of your culture and heritage, which was a phase that I went through when I was probably in my mid to late teens. And like sort of, you know, all my family were listening to rap music and funk and soul and stuff. And I was like, no, that's not me. And I dyed my hair blue. I started dressing as a punk. I was wearing like leather and black lipstick and chains and studs everywhere because I wanted to be different. And it was because I felt uncomfortable being black. I felt uncomfortable because of the experiences I was having, you know, the racism and all that stuff that you alluded to. Lots of all that stuff was going on. And for me, I just wonder, you know, because I know there probably are still many young people who are in their formative years who may still feel that way and feel that they want to deny their heritage and deny their culture. And how can we help them? How can we support our young people to own their heritage and to be proud of it?
Do you know, I think a lot of youth workers have spent many years trying to get young people, particularly working class young people, to actually feel proud of who they are and be, you know, be part of decision making. I think it's very complex. And I remember, I don't know if you've heard of it, but there was a program made called Coffee Coloured Children.
Oh no.
And no, it was a training video that we used mainly in the 80s, and it was made by two young people who were filmmakers who were mixed race. The mum was white, dad was Nigerian, but he was an absent father, so they were brought up by their white mum, and they went to a school which was 99% white, so they were the only black kids in the school. And I mean, this to me was it still makes me cry when I think about it, but they so wanted to be white to fit in. They were scrubbing their skin. They were using bleach and all sorts in the bath to try and fit in. And the other kids used to keep saying to them, but you can't have a white mum. She can't be your mum because you're black. And they would go home and say to their mum, well, are you really our mum? Because, you know, we're black. And they did that journey of the absolute utter denial and self-harming, as we would call it now, to deal with that. And I think you're absolutely right. There are probably thousands, if not millions, of young people who are struggling with their identities, especially those that have probably been in the care system. And I don't have magic answers to that, except they need to be surrounded by people who get it, whether they be black or white people, but people who get it, who can help them with that anger and their pain and that journey. And I don't know how we achieve that, but it breaks my heart to think that after all these years, we've still got generations of young people who don't know who they are and how to feel it. But it doesn't surprise me when we're constantly being asked that ridiculous question, where you from? Where you really from?
Yeah.
If that goes on and on, nobody's going to believe for themselves that they belong here. And that's what happens. I mean, I have arguments with my friends who refer to themselves as Asian and everyone else is English. And I'll say, well, actually, you're English. You were born here. You might not like saying you're English, but you are, you know, and you need to acknowledge that, because as long as we keep saying we're not English, then everybody else says, well, you're not English then, are you? Where you're really from? So we've got to do some self-reflection and start that process. It's a very difficult journey when you have been told most of your life that you can't possibly be from here.
Yeah, and that does resonate with me, Ranjana, because I have a son who I adopted, and he has, because we live in a predominantly white area, he went to a predominantly white primary school, and you know, there's lots of issues around his sense of identity, because when he was in the care system, he was with white foster carers. So he's in a stage of denial, really, about what his heritage is. As much as I do lots of work with him, it's about educating sort of his friends and his school environment around, you know, sort of that acceptance and that acceptance of difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it's not for him to fight those battles, it's for other people to accept him for who he is. And that's the kind of challenge that I have with him in particular. And I know there's lots of other young people who are in the same boat, which is why I kind of raised the question. You know, and I'm just thinking maybe there's something we could do in schools.
That's what I was just going to say, because I think in the home we can protect our children from some of that pain and be there. But when they get to school, if the teachers don't get it and they don't challenge and they don't understand it, so it's back to my thing about we need to work in schools we need to work everywhere, but in schools we need to give teachers safe spaces to discuss these things and how to do it. When I first set up my business in 1998, I spent quite a lot of time in Aycliffe Young People's Centre, which was secure accommodation for young people. And they had, in 1998, only recently started getting black kids from London into Aycliffe. And again, a really good leadership example, employers saying, we need help to understand what this actually means for us, for our staff and for our organisation. So I went in and spent a couple of years doing training with the staff and advising them on things they could do. And I mean, the staff, again, I still had to battle through some of the staff saying, well, I don't see why we should do that. That's not what we do here, you know, but because equality isn't about giving everybody the same. It's about giving people what they need. And that was something that was missing, that's been missing in people's understanding. So I had a fantastic time at Aycliffe working there, because senior management wanted me there. They wanted to listen to what I had to say. They put the resources into it. They made me feel welcome. The staff and I got on quite well in the end and engaged in that way. And I left, when I walked away, I felt I'd done a good job. And I think we need to do that in schools. And it's more than putting Black history into the curriculum. You see, that's what education's focusing on. Well, we'll change the curriculum, we'll teach them this and we'll teach them that. No, we need teachers to understand why that's important. We need teachers to also learn to take responsibility and go and learn about things they don't know about, and be free to ask for help. Sorry.
Thanks, Irene. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.
We've got another question. Kath, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. Hi, Ranjana. I think this question links back to Irene's and Jackie's points as well about we see a drop of aspirations between primary, junior school going into secondary school, particularly among boys, but also from girls from traditional sort of working class backgrounds. I'm wondering about how role models can really help. Do they make a difference? There's a big thing about bringing role models in, about to talk to young children at primary school to try and keep that aspiration level higher. And I just wondered if your experience was having positive role models made a difference.
Well, it can't be a bad thing, can it, Kath? I mean, at the end of the day, it's one part of a bigger picture. I think what we try to do is find simple solutions for a complex problem. You know, and I'm not against simple solutions, but it's not the only thing that's going to make that young person feel, oh, that's good, I think I'll become a doctor now. It doesn't, it's not as simple as that, is it? Yeah. I mean, they're living in a community where their influences are multitudes of negative things, positive things, following family history, you know, finances, family pressure to earn money, to bring it back into the family. You know, so much stuff that yeah, role models are a good thing. But it's, for me, it's how you introduce them to them. And you know, I think young people need safe spaces to actually ask questions and say things that they're scared of saying because someone's going to call them homophobic or racist or sexist or something. You know, give them some space to learn, because they're not getting the answers anywhere else. You know, yeah. I'm not even sure that when I was working for the local authority in the 80s, we used to have specialist advisors who would go into schools, and we would do some of those things with teachers. They didn't like it, neither did social workers. They'd like, well, we get everything right. No, we need to talk about this. But they would, at least the local authority invested in sending specialist advisors in to say, right, we're going to look at X and Y for you and engage with you. But I chair an organisation called Young People in Conversation. I didn't create this project. It was created before I went into it. And it's based on faith. But for someone who doesn't practice any religion, it's quite curious for me to go into that. But what the platforming of the faith base does is that we have an audience of young people who actually want to talk and learn. So what we're in the process of doing, something you might all like to think about, is that I've designed a program called Young Ambassadors for Peace. And Young Ambassadors for Peace Young Ambassadors for Peace and Unity. So the program is, we bring a group of young people together and take them through this program I've designed, and they become ambassadors, and they go out and they can start running their own programs for other young people to get them to understand about peace and unity. It's a bit of my Nelson Mandela type approach, with, you know, with being like Desmond Tutu. I can't do what he does, but we can work with young people to hopefully change the future. And I'll let you all know when that program has been tried and tested, and see where we get to with young people. It might be something that you might want to think about in wherever you are working with young people.
That sounds really good. I'm based up in Cumbria, and obviously we have a 99.3% white, you know, sort of, and I think it's difficult to have those conversations. As you said, there's safe spaces where people can talk about things and maybe say things that for some of us it's not palatable, you know, or it's not what we want to hear. But unless they're allowed to say it, and then we can talk and have that conversation about why that isn't you know, sort of something that we would like you to hold as a view. I think you're right. There's no space for people to be able to have that conversation and then learn about why.
And I think we also need, and I'm talking me and people like me, to not jump down people's throats when they make a mistake or they say something that they're totally unaware is inappropriate or offensive to me, you know, and to say, challenge the issue and not the person. So there's a difference between, see, challenging doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be, do you realize what you just said actually hurt me? And if you're a decent person, you'd say, I didn't mean to hurt you. That was never my intention. So you say, well, can we talk about this so I can explain to you why that has that painful impact on me? And I found that that works, even in the training that I do, that works. And people, once they understand it, are more likely to reflect, go away and engage with it and say, well, actually, I didn't know that, and I won't do that again, you know, in a positive way. So I think we've made challenging feel confrontational, and it doesn't have to be.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thanks so much. We've got another question. I say welcome. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Ranjana. Thank you. Just to say thank you so much for sharing. So much of what you said today resonated, and just a particular point I wanted to pick up on that you said that really resonated, and you know, you could have been describing how I felt really, which was, I think, after what happened with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, I mean, that was hugely upsetting and shocking. And as you say, lots of the resultant discussions are things that, you know, as somebody from a minority background, you've kind of dealt with and thought about for lots of years. But what really hurt me actually, which was a shock to me almost, was it was a mirror that I kind of felt that I was looking in, where I remembered that when I was younger, and I completely never expected, I almost took for granted that when I was older and I had children, that they wouldn't be facing the same issues as me. And that hurts to actually kind of look in the mirror and think, you know what, you as an individual, your generation or however, you haven't really changed anything, and your kids, you know, are still going to have the same struggles. And that, you know, the conversations that my parents had with me around your, you know, just matter-of-fact conversations, you know, you have to work harder than everybody else, you have to be twice as educated as everybody else, you have to accept that you're going to get passed over for opportunities, but you just have to keep going because that's, you know, that's your cross to bear. I find myself having with my teenage sons, and that's hurtful because I never expected to have those conversations. I thought they would have a level playing field and everything would be open for them, and you know, that's not the real world. And I think that hurt more than anything else, really.
I completely understand how you feel. I mean, I talk to because my sons are in their 40s now, and I recall my youngest son telling me when he was 5-6 years old, he said to me, please don't come to school and pick me up, Mum. And I said, why not? And he said, well, it was all right before they realized, and I'm that I had a PAKI for a mum, you know, so that he was accepted when they didn't know, and it was me that caused the pain to him. Well, I cried for months and months or years after that to think that I could be causing my child, who's mixed race, to have that level of pain. And then he used to say to me, he used to put his jumper on his head with the sleeves hanging down and walk around as if he was a Rasta man, as he used to say, and he used to say to me, well, at least if I was black, I'd know who I was, but I look like this and I don't know who I am. So the struggles, and that was the 1980s, you know, what I would say to you is, it's made me more determined now not to give up that battle, because my grandchildren, I've got a 22-year-old now and a 20-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they've had to suffer some of that, and I'm not putting up with it anymore. I'm not giving up, you know, because it would be too easy, I think. And all I could, I mean, I was guilty of telling Stefan, my youngest, to punch people in the goal because I got so frustrated by what was happening to him. But I mean, I've not told my grandchildren to do that. I thought better of it. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, all we can do is be there and say, no, that's just not right. And we
absolutely. Sorry, I've got a little more topic. Simone's probably going to tell me off because that wasn't the question I actually put in the box. So I'll come back to the question.
Okay.
Which was, so I'm a British Asian of Pakistani heritage, and I really struggle with the term BAME and BME. Not because I don't believe that there are common struggles that non-white ethnic minority groups have, and there's clearly strength in numbers, and it makes sense for us to champion causes together that will benefit all, but I feel that it homogenises all minority groups together and just allows laziness, I guess, for organisations to perhaps focus on one group over another, thinking they've done the BME thing, and that's something that I struggle with all the time, and I wanted to get your view on that.
You've highlighted a big debate that's going on as we speak, especially as a result of COVID and the disproportionate numbers of BAME people who are dying. It means nothing. What on earth does BAME actually mean? And what the lid's off that as well, because what's being said is, look, is it Pakistani, Bangladeshi? Is it Turkish? Who are you talking about that are actually dying as a result of it? Using that collective term means nothing anyway. So it's got, at the moment, it's a very dangerous term, in my opinion, to be using in that context. But what you're highlighting is, Asia, that we've all been told what this label is for us. We didn't have a choice in it. I mean, when I arrived in England, I was coloured. Then I became an ethnic minority. Then I became a minority ethnic person. Then I became a black and minority ethnic person, BME, and now BAME. And in between that, there was BAMA, which was black, Asian, minority, ethnic and refugees, was used for a short term. Who invents these? I've concluded there's some civil servants who sit in an office and come up with these terms that mean nothing to me, because if I'm having a conversation with you or Simone, we talk to each other with our names. We don't. Why do we need to struggle and worry about, well, how do you define yourself? Are you a BAME, BAME, BME, Asian, whatever you are? There are specific circumstances when we need to have a collective label, and it should be a label that is actually pertinent to what it is that we're talking about. So in the case of COVID, we need to know specifically what they're talking about. In general terms, in equality and diversity type work, we need a sort of collective. But there's a little bit of his history for you. In the 70s, in the UK, we adopted, and I'm using the royal we here, adopted the term black as a collective for anybody that wasn't white. But the government at that time wasn't having it, because it felt like we were doing Black Power and Black Panthers from the US. So they refused to acknowledge it as any sort of terminology. And it took until BME was introduced to actually get an acknowledgement of black, but we never really defined what that black was. So at the moment, we're arguing about, is black African Caribbean or African American, like Black Lives Matters, or is it still the collective for everybody? It's a mess, Satya. It's an absolute mess. And I don't know where we're going to go from here, but what I will tell you, there'll be another term that we won't have any control over, and we'll be told that, well, that's what you are. And I just want it to stop. And it gets worse with the ethnic monitoring boxes, which were introduced in the 70s, because none of us knew what any of those meant, did we? And even now, they're inappropriate for the fourth generation who were born here. How far back do we have to go to say, well, I'm an 8th Indian, So as is my ethnic origin,
Yeah.
or Pakistani, you know, this.
Yeah, I'll just tell you one last funny thing, and I'll switch off Simone and give somebody else a chance. But on that boxing, the funniest thing when my son was young, he came home from school and he had the box that you have to, sorry, the form you have to fill in, the re-registration one, and he brought it to me, and he'd drawn a new box under the ethnic diversity. He was so young, and he said, oh, I drew a new box because none of these are me, and he'd written Brown English as his own box and ticked it because he didn't recognise any of the other terms, like, he didn't mean anything to him. He was so young, and I just found it hilarious that I'm brown and I'm English.
To be fair, brown's been reintroduced because people of colour's come in, hasn't it? The American terminology of people of colour, that doesn't mean anything either, actually, but it just feels softer and nicer. But brown, I've heard more people referring to themselves as brown now, so maybe we're heading in a direction.
I'll tell him his 6-year-old self was maybe seeing the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Good luck.
Wow, that was, I feel like a total honour to have facilitated those questions and conversations this afternoon. I can't believe where that last hour has gone, but I've got, before we finish, we didn't finish all our questions, I knew we wouldn't, but we need to know what's next, because you're a woman on a mission from the age of 4, you know, you've been a trailblazer. So what's next? We've heard about the Young Ambassadors for Peace, and when you know more about that, or you in a position to share, we'll put that across the community. So what's next? Because we've took the lids off all over the place.
Well, I think we've got to be realistic about our roles and our positions. So if you're someone like me who's retired now and I can only influence in a way like this, I'll take every opportunity to do that. But if you're working, you can certainly question yourself and ask your bosses, your managers, your team leaders, what are we actually going to do about this? And actually learn to not be defensive and actually actively listen. And in the small steps will take us on that journey, but never give up the passion and believing in yourself, because you're doing the right thing. Even if it feels like a mountain, just keep going, because every little thing is going to be a collective thing. So it's this thing about join the anti-racists on this occasion. So don't be a silent non-racist, be an anti-racist and actively challenge and do things.
That was absolutely just marvellous. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, you're very active on LinkedIn, aren't you?
Yes, yes.
So they can find you on LinkedIn. You're not on Twitter, are you? I don't think.
No.
No, but
I'm
LinkedIn,
not very savvy on social media.
I'm one of the biggest, I love the, you know, absolutely, I love the lids being off everywhere, but I loved about, you know, it's challenge the issue, not the person. I think that is something that resonates. I think you've given some real clear sort of guidance steps, like you say, small steps. The sum of all those parts can really impact, because this is not going away. This has to change now. We can't be having this conversation again with your grandchildren's children, etc., etc. We've absolutely loved spending the last hour with you. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for all your questions. There were tremendous questions, and you are a brilliant orator, and lovely to just be in conversation and be in your presence this afternoon. Thank you so much.
And you, thank you.
Thank you so much, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you all.